My name is Geraldine Pruitt. I'm 88 years old, and until last spring, I believed I was born alone and would die the same way. You see, being an only child shapes you in quiet, stubborn ways. It teaches you to be self-contained, to make your own fun, to hold your pain like a secret no one else can see. My parents, Edna and Walter, were distant people, proper, polished, and stone-faced through every holiday and hardship. They loved me, I think, in their own way. But I was raised in a house where children were to be seen and not heard, and emotions were best left behind the pantry door. I was 8 years old the first time I asked my mother why she looked so sad when she thought I wasn't watching. She slapped the question right out of my mouth with the back of her hand and told me never to ask foolish things again. So I didn't. I grew up quiet, obedient, and strangely hollow. I never had siblings to argue with or play tricks on. Never had another heartbeat in the night across the hall. Just silence, long hallways, and parents who locked certain doors with actual keys. My father had a study I was never allowed in. My mother had a jewelry box with a broken clasp she opened only when she thought I was asleep. Still, I made a life. Married young, divorced younger. Raised a son, Marvin, who now lives in Idaho and calls once a month, if that. I live alone in a peach-colored cottage on the edge of town, with ivy climbing up the porch rails and a rocking chair that creaks like it's telling secrets. I bake pies for the church on Sundays. I take my tea at 3 o'clock sharp. I do crosswords in ink. I have, in all ways that count, lived an ordinary life. Until the day a man knocked on my door with a photograph, a letter, and a story that blew 70 years of silence wide open. It was a Wednesday. I remember because I just set out my banana bread to cool and was watching the mail truck creep past my driveway when the knock came. It was sharp. 3 quick raps like someone sure of their purpose. I opened the door to find a man in his mid-30s. Clean-cut, nervous eyes, holding a brown leather satchel against his chest like a shield. "Mrs. Geraldine Pruitt?" he asked. He nodded. My hand tightened on the doorframe. He looked relieved, like I'd just confirmed something impossible. Then he reached into his satchel and pulled out a small envelope and an old, curling photograph. The photo was faded with age, sepia-toned and creased at the corners, but I could still make out 2 little girls sitting side by side on a wooden porch. One had dark braids. The other was me. I stared at the photo. My breath snagged. "I don't understand," I said, though part of me did. Part of me always had. The man swallowed hard. "My name is Charles. My grandmother was your sister." I blinked. "That's not possible. I never had a sister." He held out the envelope. "She wrote this for you. Asked me to find you before she passed." My hands were trembling as I took the envelope. On the front, in delicate cursive, was written, "To Geraldine, my dearest sister. I'm sorry it's taken me a lifetime to reach you." My knees nearly gave out. "Would you mind if I came in?" Charles asked gently. I stepped aside without a word, my heart pounding like it hadn't in decades. We sat in the parlor, surrounded by doilies and the faint smell of cinnamon. I stared at the letter on my lap for a long time before finally slipping my thumb under the seal. The paper inside was yellowed and fragile, like a ghost whispering from another life. "My sweet Geraldine, you were just 2 years old when they took me away. I was 5. Our parents said I was too much trouble, that I'd ruined something sacred. They told me you were too young to remember me, and that it was better if we started over. So they sent me to a home and I never saw you again. But I never forgot you. Carried your name like a prayer. I told my children about you. And when I got sick, I told Charles to find you, to give you this photo and this letter, and to say I'm sorry for everything we lost and everything we were kept from. You were never alone, Geraldine. Not really. I read it 3 times before the words truly settled. Not alone. My whole life had been built on the foundation of that lie. I looked up at Charles. Where is she now? Yes. My voice didn't sound like mine. His expression dimmed. She passed away 2 months ago. But I have more photos. And stories. If you'll let me share them. I nodded slowly, tears gathering in my eyes. My chest ached, not just from grief, but from the sudden weight of what I'd been denied. Sister. A lifetime of love stolen. And a family I never knew I had. The clock ticked behind us like it was trying to rewrite time. And for the first time in 88 years, I didn't feel like an only child anymore. The letter trembled in my lap long after I finished reading it. The fireplace crackled, the old clock struck 4, but my mind was still stuck in that photograph. The 2 little girls on the porch, one with dark braids, the other unmistakably me, smiling wide with no idea what was about to be taken from her. I turned to Charles, this gentle stranger with his soft-spoken manners and eyes too much like mine to ignore. He sat across from me, sipping the tea I'd made out of habit, though I could barely hold the kettle steady. "Tell me everything," I said. Charles nodded, reached back into his satchel, and pulled out a thin manila folder. "Her name was Loretta," he said softly. "Loretta June Elwood. She changed her last name when she was adopted by the Buckners in Mississippi. She never heard your name spoken in that house, but she remembered it. She always remembered you." I stared at the folder like it was radioactive. "Adopted," I whispered. "I thought. They said she never existed." "They told her the same thing about you," he replied. It was like hearing my entire childhood explode in reverse. Charles opened the folder and spread out photographs on my coffee table. There was Loretta as a teenager, wearing a worn Sunday dress and a faraway look in her eyes. Loretta in college, clutching a small suitcase. Loretta holding a baby, him. "She became a schoolteacher," he said, his voice catching. "Taught 2nd grade for 30 years. She sang in church. Loved crossword puzzles and red velvet cake. And every birthday she'd light 2 candles. One for her, one for you." My throat tightened. I felt like I was mourning someone I had just met. Charles handed me a page of scanned documents. Old adoption papers. Medical records. Even a grainy scan of a black and white school photo that showed both of us together in kindergarten. "They had her erased," I murmured. "Cut her out like a cancer." Charles nodded. "She always said your parents were cold. Trick. She never understood why they kept you and not her. She assumed it had something to do with how loud she was, how curious. She was 5. And they threw her away like garbage." That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window with the letter in one hand and the old photo in the other, replaying the past like a broken film reel. There had been signs. The time I asked about the 2nd toothbrush in the bathroom drawer and was told it was for guests, though we never had any. The small child sweater I found in the attic once, too small to be mine, with the name Lori stitched inside. My mother yanked it from my hands and told me not to snoop. The padlock on the basement door for all those years. I never questioned it. Because when you're a child, you believe what the people you love tell you. You believe in the version of the world they give you, even if that world has holes in it big enough to swallow a sister. The next morning, I opened my grandmother's cedar chest for the first time in decades. It still smelled faintly of mothballs and rosewater. Inside were photo albums, my childhood report cards, and a single wooden jewelry box. Opened it. Inside was a silver bracelet. On the back was an engraving I had never noticed before. O+G sisters always. My hand flew to my mouth. I fell back onto the bed, sobbing like I hadn't since the day Marvin left for college and never came back. My mother had kept this all these years, hidden it from me, and never said a word. The bracelet was proof that she hadn't forgotten Loretta. She just buried her. Like shame. But why? That afternoon, I went to the old nursing home across town where my mother had spent her final years. I had avoided the place ever since her funeral, but now I needed answers. The woman at the desk, Denise, was kind enough to let me look through my mother's remaining belongings. Most of it was garbage. Old coupons, brittle receipts, a collection of dusty romance novels. But at the bottom of one storage bin was a bundle of letters, tied with a red ribbon. They were all addressed to her. From Loretta. Every single one had been returned, unopened. The postmarks dated back over 30 years. One letter stood out. The last one. It was postmarked just 6 months before my mother died. It read, "Edna, it's Loretta. Again. I don't know if you're still alive. I don't know if you'll ever open this. But I'm writing to tell you that I'm not angry anymore. I just want Geraldine to know I exist. That's all. Please let her decide for herself. She deserves that much. Loretta." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper. She had tried. She had tried. And my mother had stopped her. She had chosen silence over truth. Again and again. And now it was my turn to choose. I walked out of that nursing home with my jaw set and my heart burning. I was going to do what my mother never had the courage to do. Tell the world the truth. Let my sister's memory breathe in the open air. If you're as stunned as I was, hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and make sure to subscribe to the channel. For the first time in 70 years, I no longer felt like I was living someone else's story. No longer just the daughter of Edna and Willis Harper. No longer just the only child. I was someone's sister. Loretta's sister. And the weight of that truth was heavier and more sacred than any lie I'd carried in my name. After I left the nursing home with that stack of returned letters, I sat in my car for a long time, the envelope trembling in my lap. There was one more piece of the puzzle I hadn't yet faced. Loretta's grave. Charles had told me she passed just 3 years ago, in a small town called Willow Creek. A sleepy stretch of Tennessee with rolling hills and a single blinking traffic light. I didn't hesitate. Packed a bag that night. Left a note on the kitchen counter for my neighbor Ruth to water the plants. And by morning I was on a Greyhound bus heading south. Heart pounding, hands clenched, soul shaking loose from decades of silence. It took 12 hours and 2 transfers. But when I stepped off the bus and onto the cracked pavement of Willow Creek, something in me settled. The sun was low in the sky, painting everything gold. I followed Charles's directions to a small white church with a rusted bell tower and a cemetery in the back. The grass was wild, the stones weather-worn. I found her in the 3rd row near the fence. Loretta June Buckner, 1943 to 2020. Beloved mother, faithful friend, forever searching. That last line undid me. I dropped to my knees and whispered, "You found me, Loretta. You found me." I pulled the bracelet from my purse and slipped it around a bouquet of lilies I brought from the florist across the street. Then I laid my hand on the headstone and closed my eyes. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I didn't know. I didn't remember you. But I know now. I'm here. And I'm not letting your story die in a drawer." That night, Charles and I sat in his mother's old kitchen. He had offered me the guest room, and we talked for hours. He told me everything Loretta had remembered. The games we played under the willow tree. The way I would sneak her cookies after dinner. How I used to call her Lori Bird. It was like meeting myself in a parallel world. A world where we had grown up together. Been there for each other's first heartbreak. Cried through losses. Laughed through years. She always knew you were out there, Charles said. Even when she didn't know where. The next morning, I asked Charles if I could visit the school where Loretta taught. They had a bench dedicated to her in the courtyard. Photograph in the hallway. Her old classroom, room 203, still bore her name above the door. One of her former students, now the principal, gave me a box of keepsakes they'd held onto. Lesson plans, yearbooks, a mug that read, "Best Teacher in Tennessee." But at the very bottom of the box was a cassette tape. No label. Just a piece of Scotch tape across the top with one word scribbled in fading ink. Geraldine. Name. Back at Charles's house, we found an old tape player and slid it in. Loretta's voice crackled through the speakers. Geraldine. I don't know if you'll ever hear this, but if you do, I just want to say one thing. It wasn't your fault. You didn't leave me. They did. I never blamed you. I just missed you. Every single day. I pressed a hand to my chest as she continued. You were the one thing that felt like home. Even if it was only for a short time. I hope you grew up safe. I hope you were loved. And if you weren't, I hope you know you deserved to be. I was crying before the tape ended. And when it did, I sat there in silence, holding the machine to my chest like it was a heartbeat. By the time I returned home to Maple Hollow, something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just Geraldine Harper, the widow who made the best blueberry cobbler in town. I was the sister of a girl who had been thrown away and still found her light. And now, it was my duty to carry her voice. Called the local paper. Then the church newsletter. Then the town's podcast host, a bright-eyed 30-something named Kaylee who loved local stories and had a gift for storytelling. I told them everything. And soon Loretta's story wasn't just in my house anymore. It was everywhere. Her name was on the front page of the Hollow Gazette. Her photo was displayed at the local library. People started leaving flowers on her grave, even folks who'd never met her. One day, I was invited to speak at the women's luncheon at the Rotary Club. They asked me to share my journey. And that's when I did something no one expected. I read aloud one of Loretta's letters to my mother. The same one she never opened. I let her words fill the room, unfiltered, untamed. And when I finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. But the biggest surprise came after the luncheon, when an older woman in a tailored navy coat pulled me aside in the parking lot. She said, "My name is Patricia. I used to work at the Children's Court in the 1950s. I remember your family. I remember your sister." I stared at her, heart hammering. She said, "There's more you don't know. If your heart is racing like mine, hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel." Patricia's voice was quiet but firm, the kind of voice that came from a lifetime of knowing too much and saying too little. She leaned in, glanced around the church parking lot like someone might be listening, and said the words that jolted me right back to 1950. "Your father signed something." I blinked. Signed what? She opened her worn leather purse and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "This is a photocopy of a court order I kept. I wasn't supposed to. But back then, sometimes you kept things because your gut told you you'd need them someday." She handed it to me. I unfolded it with trembling hands. It was a guardianship relinquishment order. Dated August 7, 1951. My father's name, Willis Harper. My mother's, Edna. And the child listed beneath. Loretta June Harper. "She was born when your mama was still recovering from the flu," Patricia said. "And your father, he told the court she was a burden. Said he already had one baby and couldn't afford another." I couldn't breathe. My father had signed her away like a stray dog. Voluntarily. My mother had countersigned. They'd never lost Loretta. They gave her away. They told the court she had developmental delays, Patricia added softly. But I saw her. She was alert, curious. She held my finger and wouldn't let go. That girl didn't have anything wrong with her but bad luck. Back at home, I sat at the kitchen table with the court order spread out before me, the morning light slicing across it like a blade. My entire life, I had believed in the myth of the Harper family. A tight-knit unit, church-going, hard-working, morally upright. But now I saw what had always been true. My parents weren't saints. They were people who made cowardly, selfish choices, and then buried the evidence. And they buried my sister with it. I thought about the moments in my childhood that never quite made sense. Why I always felt like someone was missing from the family photo. Why my mother got so tense whenever adoption was mentioned at church. Why she would stare blankly into the fire on Christmas Eve. Her hands fidgeting in her lap like she was trying to forget something her heart wouldn't release. Now I knew. Over the next week, I made it my mission to track every breadcrumb Loretta left behind. I visited the courthouse in Willow Creek. Dug through archives at the public library. I even reached out to one of Loretta's oldest friends, May Davenport, who told me stories that cracked me wide open. She always wanted to sing, May said. Said she had a sister who used to hum lullabies to her when she was small. I did, I whispered. May pulled out a photo album. Flipped to a page marked 1960. There she was. Loretta, standing on a makeshift stage in front of her high school class, holding a microphone, eyes closed, singing her heart out. I traced her outline with my fingertip. She never stopped believing in you, May said. Even when everyone told her to move on. That night, I lay awake in May's guest room, watching the shadows stretch across the ceiling. 70 years of silence. 70 years of stolen sisterhood. And a whole town that knew Loretta's worth. While my own family hid her like shame. When I returned to Maple Hollow, I knew what I had to do. I called the producers of Morning Light, a national morning show that loved small-town stories with big heart. They'd recently covered a woman who reunited with her World War II pen pal after 60 years. I figured if there was ever a story that needed to be heard, it was Loretta's. The producer, a kind woman named Tessa, called me back 2 days later. I cried 3 times reading your letter, she said. Would you be willing to come on air? I swallowed hard. Yes. The studio was colder than I expected. I wore Loretta's brooch on my blazer. A small gold locket she left to Charles, who insisted I wear it. As I sat under the lights and faced the camera, I thought about all the years I'd spent thinking I was alone. All the birthdays where I blew out candles, wishing for something I couldn't name. And then the host said, "This is Geraldine Harper." At 84 years old, she just discovered she had a sister. And what she did next will warm your heart. Took a breath. And told the world the truth. About the little girl who was taken. About the parents who pretended she never existed. About the bracelet. Tape. The photograph. And about how, despite everything, Loretta still chose to love me. When I finished, the audience stood and applauded. The host hugged me. But the most powerful moment came seconds later. Because right after the interview aired, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She wasn't the only one. Attached was a photo of a woman who looked exactly like me, but younger. The message glowed on my screen like a secret waiting to change everything. She wasn't the only one. And just below it, a photograph. A woman, perhaps in her late 60s. Same cheekbones. Same storm gray eyes. A crooked smile I'd only ever seen in the mirror when I was younger. I stared at it for a long time before calling the number. A nervous voice answered. Hello. Cleared my throat. This is Geraldine Harper. You texted me about Loretta. Was. Then a trembling breath. My name is Delphine. I think I'm your niece. Delphine and I met at a cafe 2 hours outside Maple Hollow. She wore a navy blue sweater and gripped a leather-bound folder like it held her whole life inside. Birth records, letters, photocopies of photos Loretta kept in a shoebox. There were pictures of Loretta pregnant, alone. One with a hospital bracelet and Delphine's name handwritten on it. She wanted to keep me, Delphine whispered, tracing her finger over the image. But she was barely 18. The foster home said she wasn't stable enough. They took me before she could fight. I stared at the picture of baby Delphine, wrapped in a yellow blanket, eyes wide open, and felt the sting of another truth I hadn't prepared for. Loretta wasn't just my sister. She was a mother who lost her child. Again. I found her again when I was in my 20s, Delphine said. We had a good few years. But then, cancer. She never talked much about your parents. Only that she had a sister. A lullaby she remembered. She sang it to me once. Said you used to hum it. I felt tears sting the corners of my eyes. It went like this, didn't it? I whispered before humming the tune, soft and slow. Delphine's hand shot to her mouth. Her shoulders trembled. She said it was real, she whispered. Everyone told her it was a dream. We sat there for 2 hours piecing together 2 broken timelines. Delphine had grown up in and out of homes, never staying anywhere too long. She became a nurse, raised 2 sons. She had Loretta's laugh and my stubborn streak. When she smiled, it was like seeing a version of my sister I never got to grow old with. A week later, we returned to Willow Creek together. We stood at Loretta's grave, one I had never seen before. A simple stone marked with her name and one line. Loved beyond what words can say. Delphine placed a bouquet of lilies at the base. I placed the locket I'd worn on the morning light show beside it. She never got her justice, Delphine said. She got something better, I replied. She got to be remembered. Loudly. Publicly. With love. I could have let the story end there. But I didn't. I went back on morning light with Delphine beside me. We shared everything. How Loretta's story echoed through generations of silence and shame, and how we were finally breaking that chain. People wrote in from all over the country. Women. Men. Children. Messages like, I watched with my grandma and she cried for the sister she lost. Thank you for speaking what so many of us were told to forget. The episode became one of their most watched segments of the year. But I wasn't done. 2 months later, I hosted a reunion at the Maple Hollow Community Center. I called it the Lost Names Gathering. People from neighboring towns came to share their hidden stories. We filled the walls with photos of family members long erased. Names once whispered in shame now spoken with pride. At the front of the room was Loretta's picture, framed in gold surrounded by sunflowers. She's not forgotten anymore, I said into the microphone. None of them are. As for me, well, at 85 I've started writing a book. Delphine's helping me. We meet every Friday at the same cafe where we first met. She calls me Aunt Jerry. Sometimes just G. Her boys call me Grammy G. I never had children of my own. But life, in its strange and twisted mercy, gave me a second chance at family. Real one. Not built on silence, but on truth. So, if you're watching this now and wondering if the past can be rewritten, the answer is yes. Not erased but rewritten. With courage. A voice. With a faded photograph and the strength to finally look it in the eye and say, I see you. And I'm here now. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Share your own stories below, because sometimes the truth doesn't just set you free, it brings you home.